An 8-month pregnant woman is kicked out of her home in the middle of a storm, penniless, without explanation, simply for daring to exist. But the man who thought he had her dead doesn't know that the darkest path sometimes leads straight to the most dangerous man in the city. And when the most notorious criminal on the East Coast steps out of his armored SUV in the midst of the storm, things begin to change. Like, comment the city you're viewing to let me know how far this story has progressed. And watch to the end, because this is just the beginning. The rain had been falling for 3 hours before it turned mean. It started as the kind of soft November drizzle that fogs up windshields and makes Chicago feel like a city wrapped in gauze. Manageable, almost gentle. By 11:30, it had become something else entirely. The kind of rain that leans into you, that finds the gaps in your collar, that makes every lit window in every house look like a taunt aimed specifically at you. Violetta Hale noticed the shift somewhere around the time her left shoe soaked through completely. She was standing on the marble entrance steps of a house that had her name nowhere on the deed, carrying a suitcase that weighed 32 pounds, because she'd counted every item twice before packing it, knowing she wouldn't get a second trip. Her right hand held the handle. Her left hand pressed flat against the side of her stomach the way it had been doing for the past 6 weeks, instinctively. The way a person presses a hand against a bruise not to soothe it, but just to know it's still there. She was 8 months pregnant. She was also, as of 11 minutes ago, homeless. Behind her, framed in the warm amber light of the doorway like something out of a magazine spread about successful men in beautiful houses, Grant Holloway stood with his arms crossed and his jaw set in that particular configuration she'd spent 4 years learning to read. The configuration that meant the conversation was over. That meant he'd already decided. That meant whatever she said next would be treated as confirmation of whatever story he was already telling himself. "The account transfers have your signature," he said. He'd been saying versions of this for 40 minutes. The patience in his voice was the worst part. Not anger, not cruelty, just a quiet, administrative finality. 14 separate transactions over 8 months, 4.3 million, Violetta. "Grant, I had 3 forensic accountants look at it. I didn't touch those accounts. You know I didn't. I know what the records show." She turned to face him. The rain was in her eyes. She didn't wipe it away. "Then you know the records were changed. Someone changed them. You have to know." "I know you've been lying to me." He said it the way you'd say a weather report. Overcast. Mid-40s. Chance of precipitation. "I know you've been having an affair, and I know that child—" He stopped. Let the silence do the rest. Violetta felt something happen in her chest. Not pain exactly. More like a structural failure. The way a building doesn't collapse all at once but settles. You hear the groaning of it before the fall. "Say it," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. He didn't. "Say what you mean, Grant. If you're going to throw me out in the middle of November, at least say the actual words out loud." He looked at her the way you look at a problem you've already solved. "The car service will return any remaining personal items to an address of your choosing by Friday. The legal team will be in contact next week regarding—" "Grant." She stepped toward him. He didn't move back, but something behind his eyes did. "I am 8 months pregnant. It is 34 degrees. You cannot—" "I already have." He reached for the door handle. "Don't call the house line." The door closed. Not slammed. That would have been something. That would have contained some trace of feeling. Instead, it closed the way doors close in hotels. Smooth, sealed, final. Violetta stood on the steps for a long moment. The rain collected in the divot at the base of her throat. Her feet, both of them now, were completely soaked through. She could feel the cold working its way up her ankles, past her calves, settling somewhere behind her knees. She picked up the suitcase and walked to the street. There was a moment, just one, brief and almost embarrassing in its smallness, where she considered going back. Knocking, trying again. She'd been good at trying again. 4 years of practice. 4 years of reading rooms, adjusting her approach, finding the version of herself that fit the particular shape of his mood that day. She'd gotten skilled at it the way people get skilled at things they never wanted to learn. She didn't go back. She walked. The neighborhood was old money and manicured silence. The kind of street where you don't hear other people's arguments because the walls are thick and the lots are wide, and everyone has agreed, tacitly, to pretend certain things aren't happening. The nearest bus stop was 9 blocks south. She didn't have her phone. She'd left it on the kitchen counter when Grant had called her into his study, and she hadn't thought to grab it on the way out because she hadn't known the way out was permanent. She had the suitcase, a coat that wasn't waterproof, $63 in cash in the inside pocket of that coat, and whatever was left of her ability to function like a person who had a plan. The baby moved. She stopped walking, pressed her hand harder against her side. The movement was slow and rolling, an elbow, maybe, working its way across, and she stood in the middle of the sidewalk in the rain and breathed through it and waited until it passed. "I know," she said quietly to no one and nothing. "I know." She kept walking. By midnight, she'd covered 4 blocks, and the rain had accelerated into something with real violence behind it. Sheet lightning strobed in the distance over the lake. The suitcase wheel on the right side had started dragging. She must have damaged it on a curb lip somewhere, and every 10 steps she had to tilt the whole thing at an angle to compensate. Her arm ached from the shoulder down. Her lower back had been a persistent problem for 3 weeks, and it was not improving. She made it to a bus shelter. She sat on the metal bench inside it. The shelter's plastic panels were cracked and did nothing meaningful against the sideways rain, but the roof was intact, and she was grateful for that in a bone-deep, humiliated way that she didn't have the energy to be angry about yet. She sat. She tried to think. The short list of people she could call without a phone was very short. Her father had been dead for 2 years. Her mother had remarried and moved to Scottsdale, and they spoke at Christmas if the timing worked. She had colleagues, had colleagues at Hale Biotech before Grant had quietly, systematically involved himself in the board until her access to her own inheritance was mostly theoretical. She had women she'd had lunch with. She had a college roommate in Seattle. None of these were people she could show up to at midnight, 8 months pregnant, without catastrophically reshaping the shape of her life in their eyes in a way she wasn't ready for. There was a payphone 2 blocks south. She was almost certain. She stood up. The pain in her back hit her at a different angle than it had before. Sharper, lower, not the grinding ache she'd been managing, but something with a point to it. She breathed through her nose, exhaled slow. The prenatal books had chapters about pain differentiation. Productive pain versus warning pain, they called it, with the cheerful clinical language of people who write books in offices. She picked up the suitcase. She walked. The payphone was there. It took her 8 minutes to get to it. The receiver smelled like cigarettes and rain and someone else's bad night. She lifted it, dialed the only number she had completely memorized besides the house she'd just been locked out of, and listened to it ring 9 times before she accepted that her college roommate in Seattle was not answering her landline at midnight on a Tuesday, which was a completely reasonable thing for a person to not do. She hung up. Stood there holding the receiver for a moment longer than necessary. Put it back. The lightning was closer now, not distant lake lightning anymore, but local, immediate, the kind where you count the seconds between the flash and the sound, and the count is very small. The thunder that followed the next strike came less than 2 seconds behind the light and was loud enough to make her flinch and take a step back from the payphone involuntarily. She needed to move. The exposed intersection was bad. She needed to find a diner, a gas station, a lobby of some kind where she could be dry and figure out the next 4 hours with some semblance of a functioning brain. She turned south. That was when the second pain came. It was different enough from the first that she knew immediately it was different. Not in her back this time. Central. Below the ribs and above the hips and inside, deep, in the parts of her body that had been reorganized over the past 8 months to accommodate another life. The kind of pain that stops you mid-step. That makes the world temporarily reduced to just the pain and your breathing and the space between them. She grabbed the phone booth frame with her free hand. The metal was cold and slick and real. She focused on that. The temperature of the metal, the texture of it, her own breath going in, going out, the small white cloud of it in the freezing rain. It passed. She exhaled, pressed her hand to her stomach. The baby wasn't moving. "Come on," she said. To herself, to the baby, to the intersection, to whatever was left of the night that could still go sideways. "Come on. Not tonight." She stepped off the curb. The highway access road opened up half a block south of the bus shelter. She'd been walking toward it without fully registering it, the mental map of the neighborhood imprecise in the dark and the rain and the pain. It wasn't a highway exactly, more of a connector road, a wide two-lane stretch that linked the residential area to the service routes near the industrial park south of the 90. Late on a Tuesday in November, there was no traffic, just wet asphalt reflecting lightning in long orange-white smears. She was in the middle of it when the third pain hit. This one dropped her. Not gradually, not with warning. One moment she was moving forward with the suitcase tilted at its compensating angle, and the next her knees were on the road, and her hand was on the road, and the suitcase had fallen over and she was breathing in the smell of wet pavement and oil and cold water, and she could not get up. The pain was extraordinary. She'd had a reasonable pain threshold before the pregnancy. She'd always thought of herself that way, as someone who handled things, who pushed through, who didn't make a production of difficulty. But this was outside the category she'd been filing things under. This was not difficulty. This was her body issuing a directive she didn't have the authority to override. She got one knee up, couldn't get the other. The road was slick, and her soaked coat offered no traction, and her left arm was shaking. The lightning came. The thunder came. The rain came harder, if that was possible. A new intensity that felt almost personal. And Violetta Hale knelt on a wet highway access road in the dark, with no phone and $63 and a damaged suitcase and her hand pressed against the side of her unborn daughter, and she made a sound she didn't recognize as hers, low and ragged and desperate, the sound of someone running out of the things they'd been using to hold themselves together. She didn't hear the engines. She registered the headlights first, not one set, but 5, a convoy formation. High beams cutting through the rain at a distance that shrank very quickly, high-end vehicles moving fast the way high-end vehicles do when the road is clear, and the people inside them are people who don't generally stop for things. She raised her right arm, the arm without the suitcase, the arm not pressed to her side. She raised it, and she didn't wave it because she didn't have the energy for waving. She just held it up, a vertical fact in the middle of the road. The lead vehicle braked, not a gradual, considered braking. A hard, sudden application of force. She heard the tires, heard the system working against itself, the massive thing struggling to stop. It stopped 15 feet from her. Then the others stopped behind it. She was still kneeling. She was aware, distantly, of how she looked, soaked through, enormous with pregnancy. Kneeling on a highway in the rain with one arm in the air. She would have laughed if she'd had access to that response. Instead, she just stayed where she was and breathed. The driver's door of the lead SUV opened. Then, unexpectedly, the rear passenger door opened. The man who stepped out was tall. She registered that first, then the coat, black and heavy and expensive. Entirely the wrong thing to wear into rain like this, but worn with the particular indifference of someone who either doesn't notice or doesn't care about such calculations. He stood beside the vehicle for one moment, just one, taking in the scene. The kneeling woman, the fallen suitcase, the rain, the whole impossible composition of it, with an expression she couldn't read from 15 feet away in the dark. Then he walked toward her. Not quickly, not with the urgent, fumbling energy of someone alarmed. He walked the way people walk when they've decided on a direction, and distraction is not a concept that applies to them. He crouched down in front of her. She could see his face now, late 30s, maybe early 40s. Dark eyes that did the thing eyes sometimes do when the person behind them has made a career of observing. They didn't move over her the way most people's eyes moved over a situation, assessing and cataloging and preparing a response. They just settled, took her in completely, as a single fact. "Can you stand?" he said. His voice was low and unhurried and gave nothing away. "Give me a second," she said. "Take 2. She worked her way upright. He didn't touch her. Didn't offer a hand. She didn't know if that was instinct or calculation, and she didn't care. She got herself standing. The pain had subsided to something bearable. She was shaking, but that was the cold. "The suitcase is mine," she said, for no reason she could articulate. He glanced at it, back at her. "I can see that." "I'm not—" She stopped. She didn't know what she was not. She was a lot of things currently. "I need to get somewhere. I need a phone." "Where are you trying to go?" Good question. She didn't have an answer that was honest and also didn't involve explaining the last 4 hours of her life to a stranger in a rainstorm on a service road. I'm not sure yet, she said. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he turned and said something to the driver. Quiet. 2 words she didn't catch. Turned back to her. There's a medical facility 15 minutes from here, private. My people can have a doctor see you tonight. I didn't mention cost. She looked at him. The convoy idling behind him. The rain between them. Why? She said. He picked up her suitcase. You were in the road. That's not a reason. It's the only one I have. He turned toward the vehicle. You can stand out here if you want, but you're going to get back on the ground in about 4 minutes. She followed him. She didn't know his name yet. She didn't know that every one of the 12 men currently sitting in those 5 vehicles was armed. She didn't know that the private facility he was taking her to had no public address, no listed phone number, and no record in any civilian database. She didn't know that the convoy had been returning from something that would make front-page news in 36 hours. She didn't know any of that. She knew that the rain was a wall of cold against her back, and that his coat was dry against the leather seat beside her, and that when the vehicle began to move, she felt, for the first time in hours, something approximating stillness. Then the car hit a bump. The pain came back, but different this time. Wrong in a way that traveled from her stomach upward. A slow, spreading wrongness that she had no framework for. She pressed her hand hard against her side. The baby still wasn't moving. She looked at the man across from her. He was watching her face. He had been watching her face since she'd gotten in. How far? She said. Something shifted behind his eyes. He leaned forward and said 2 words to the driver. The convoy accelerated. And Violetta Hale, who had been very carefully not thinking about what the absence of movement meant, who had been filing it under manageable, under probably fine, under not tonight, finally let herself think it. Let the thought surface fully, cold and specific and terrifying, as the lights of Chicago smeared past the rain-covered window, and the man across from her kept his eyes on her face like he was monitoring something he wasn't prepared to lose. The baby hadn't moved in 40 minutes, and somewhere beneath the fear, beneath the cold and the exhaustion and the wreckage of the night, something else surfaced. A memory. 3 weeks ago. Her prenatal appointment. The physician whose hands had been too careful, whose questions had been oddly specific, who'd looked at her chart longer than necessary before giving her a clear answer. The fatigue she'd chalked up to late pregnancy. The nausea that had started 6 weeks ago and hadn't fully stopped. The sensation, sometimes late at night, that her body was working against itself. She hadn't told Grant, hadn't told anyone, had told herself it was normal, had told herself she was being anxious, catastrophizing, finding problems in ordinary discomfort the way people do when their lives are already difficult and they're primed to expect more difficulty. But in the moving vehicle, in the accelerating convoy, with the stranger's dark eyes on her face and the baby motionless inside her, she thought about the physician's hands. Too careful, like someone who already knew what they were looking for. The medical wing smelled like antiseptic and forced calm. Violetta registered that first, before the lights, before the faces, before the hands that appeared from somewhere and guided her from the vehicle to a wheelchair she didn't want but couldn't refuse because her legs had made the refusal for her. The smell was the thing, clinical and absolute. The smell of a place designed to make the body's failures manageable, to give them clean surfaces and fluorescent certainty. She'd been in hospitals before. This was not a hospital. The ceilings were too high, the hallways too quiet, the equipment too new and too specific in ways she couldn't immediately categorize. She was taken into a room that had no windows. A woman in scrubs appeared, early 50s, gray-streaked hair pulled back hard, the kind of face that had learned to convey competence without warmth because warmth costs time. She introduced herself as Dr. Yuen. She asked questions in the rapid, economical cadence of someone who needed information and had no patience for the decorative parts of conversation. How long since last fetal movement? I don't know exactly. An hour, maybe longer. Any cramping before the falls on the road? I didn't fall. Yes. Cramping. Sharp. Low. Any spotting? No. Prior complications in this pregnancy? Violetta hesitated. The hesitation was small, but Dr. Yuen caught it the way you catch something falling off a shelf, reflexively, before it hit the floor. Ms. Hale. Some fatigue, more than I expected, and nausea that lasted longer than the first trimester. How much longer? It never fully stopped. Dr. Yuen looked at her for exactly 2 seconds. Then she turned and said something to the nurse behind her in a register too low for Violetta to catch. The nurse left quickly. Dr. Yuen put her stethoscope in her ears and pressed the bell to Violetta's abdomen without further preamble. Listened. Her expression didn't change, but something in her shoulders did. A very slight settling, like a door finding its frame. Heartbeat is present and regular, she said. The baby is stressed, but stable. We're going to run blood work, and I want an ultrasound within the next 20 minutes. What do you think it is? I don't think things. I test them. She pulled the stethoscope from her ears. Who did your prenatal care? Dr. Marsh at Northwestern-affiliated Holloway Family Medical. My husband's family endowed the wing. Dr. Yuen wrote the name down without commenting on the rest of it, but she wrote it down the way someone writes a name they intend to revisit. The door opened. Ronan Voss stood in the frame. He'd changed out of the wet coat. She registered this with the specific irrelevant attention the mind pays to small details when the large ones are too much. Dark shirt now. No tie. He looked at Dr. Yuen first, not Violetta. Status? Baby is stable. Mother's hypothermic, dehydrated, showing symptoms I need to investigate before I characterize. Dr. Yuen's voice had not changed registers for anyone in the room. She needs rest, warmth, IV fluids, and no stress for the next several hours. Are any of those things achievable in your facility? All of them. Then I'll update you when I have something to update you with. She looked at him in a way that was not particularly deferential. That means you wait outside. Ronan looked at Violetta. She looked back at him. She was sitting on the edge of the examination table in a wet coat that hadn't dried, with her hair pressed flat against her skull and her hands in her lap, and she was aware of how thoroughly undone she appeared, and she was too tired to manage it. Thank you, she said, for the car, for the stop, for the fact that she wasn't still on the road. He nodded once, left. The door closed. Dr. Yuen turned back to her with the syringe for the blood draw and said very quietly, not looking up from the vein she was preparing, "How did you end up on that road?" Violetta looked at the ceiling. My husband threw me out. Dr. Yuen pressed the needle in with the clean precision of someone who had done it 10,000 times. Tonight. About 2 hours ago? A pause. The baby's father? He says no. Violetta exhaled. He's wrong, but I can't prove it to him right now, and I couldn't prove it 2 hours ago either, so... Dr. Yuen withdrew the needle, pressed gauze to the site, taped it down. The symptoms you described, the extended nausea, the fatigue disproportionate to your stage, do you have documentation of those? Blood work from your regular physician? I have records. They're at the house, which I no longer have access to. I'll need to contact Dr. Marsh's office. You won't get them to release anything. My husband's family funds that practice. Dr. Yuen looked at her then, fully, the way she hadn't quite done since Violetta had arrived. I'm going to run a full panel, she said. Not just standard prenatal, full tox screen, metabolic panel, the works. Do you consent to that? The word tox landed somewhere specific. Yes, Violetta said. Run everything. Mutt. She slept for 3 hours. She hadn't intended to. She'd been sitting propped against the pillows with the IV in her arm, and the monitor's green line making its patient peaks across the screen, the baby's heartbeat, regular and real and impossibly reassuring. And she'd been planning to stay awake, to think, to figure out the next move. And then she was waking up with the lights dimmed and a blanket over her that hadn't been there before, and the particular disorientation of a body that had simply taken what it needed without asking. The monitor still showed the heartbeat. She checked it before she checked anything else. There was a glass of water on the table beside her. She drank all of it. The room was quiet in the way of places far from traffic. A deep structural quiet. not the muffled quiet of the city at night. Wherever this facility was, it wasn't in a neighborhood. She'd noticed that in the car, after the density of the residential streets, the landscape had changed, less light, longer stretches between intersections. They'd passed through something that felt like a gate, though she hadn't been sure. She was in Ronan Voss's house. She'd had time in the car, after the panic had leveled out into something she could hold, to understand this. The convoy. The facility that had no public address. The doctor who answered to him in a way that was respectful, but not quite the way employees are respectful of employers. More lateral, like two people who had history and had worked out their terms. This was not a clinic he'd called on her behalf. This was an infrastructure he maintained. She needed to understand who he was. She also needed to figure out what to do with the next 24 hours, and then the 24 after that. And at some point, she was going to have to contact someone who could help her access money, because $63 was not a plan. The door opened. Not Dr. Yuen. A young man, early 20s, with the careful posture of someone who'd been trained to move through other people's spaces without disturbing them. He set a tray on the table without making eye contact. Soup, crackers, a second glass of water, and left with the same economy of motion. She ate. The soup was good. This surprised her, and the surprise embarrassed her a little because she didn't know what she'd expected. The soup of a place like this, the soup of a man like that. She was finishing the crackers when the knock came. "Come in." Ronan Voss entered and did not sit down. He stood near the door with his arms at his sides, his weight slightly forward on the balls of his feet. Not aggressive, but alert, the unconscious posture of someone who does not fully relax in rooms they're not controlling. He looked at the monitor, at the IV, at her face. "How are you feeling?" "Better. The sleep helped." She paused. "Your doctor is thorough." "She is." She ran a full toxicology panel. Something changed in his expression, very small. The kind of change you only catch if you're watching carefully, and Violetta had spent 4 years becoming very good at watching carefully. She mentioned that. "What did she tell you?" "Nothing yet." He held her gaze. "The results take time." "What do you already suspect?" He looked at her for a moment, deciding something. "Yuen flagged your symptom profile when she called me after the initial exam. She said the presentation was consistent with chronic low-dose exposure to a class of compounds that interfere with placental function." He said it with the flat precision of someone delivering information, not interpreting it. "She's run this kind of screen before. She'll know more in the morning." The room was very quiet. Violetta became aware of her own breathing, the way it had gone shallow, the way her hand had moved back to her stomach without her choosing to move it. "Someone poisoned me," she said. He didn't answer, which was, itself, an answer. "Who are you?" she said. He seemed to consider whether to answer that too. Then, "Ronan Voss?" "I know your name. That's not what I asked." A pause. "I do business in this city." "What kind?" "The kind that isn't discussed in this room. I'm in your facility, in your bed, with your doctor's IV in my arm. I think we're past discretion." He looked at her. Something behind his eyes shifted. Not respect exactly, but a recalibration. "I manage interests, supply chains, disputes between parties who can't use conventional legal systems to resolve them, among other things." "You're a crime lord." "That's a tabloid word." "Is it inaccurate?" He didn't answer. "Fair enough," she said. Hot. The results came back at 6:43 in the morning. Violetta knew they were back before anyone told her because she heard Dr. Yuen's voice in the corridor. Not the words, just the cadence of it, the particular tight efficiency of someone who has found what they were looking for and is not happy about it. The door opened. Dr. Yuen entered. Ronan was behind her. The doctor set a tablet on the table. On it, a panel of numbers arranged in columns, many of them outside the normal reference range, highlighted in red. "Trimethylcadmium derivative," Dr. Yuen said. "Low concentration, but consistent with extended exposure over a period of 2 to 3 months. It's not a naturally occurring compound. It doesn't appear accidentally." She paused to let that land. "It accumulates slowly." The early symptoms present as standard pregnancy discomfort, fatigue, nausea, occasional cramping, which is why it's effective. It doesn't trigger alarm bells because it mimics things that already exist in the pregnancy experience. Violetta stared at the numbers on the tablet. What does it do? At continued exposure, it degrades placental integrity. It increases the risk of preterm labor, placental abruption, fetal growth restriction. In sufficient concentration over sufficient time, Dr. Ewan stopped. Started again. It is not immediately fatal to the mother, but it is fatal eventually to the pregnancy. The silence in the room was total. Someone was trying to kill my baby, Violetta said. The words came out with no particular inflection, like she was testing them against the air. Someone was administering a substance designed to cause pregnancy loss while appearing to be a natural complication, Dr. Ewan said. That is what the results indicate. The prenatal appointments, the injections, the supplements they gave me. Violetta's voice was still flat. Something in her had gone very still and very cold, in a way that was separate from the temperature of the room. Dr. Marsh's office. Ronan said, Ewan. I'll step out, Dr. Ewan said. She gathered the tablet. At the door she paused without turning back. The baby is okay. I want to be clear about that. We've started a chelation protocol. The levels in your system are elevated, but we caught them before the threshold. You're going to be okay. She left. Ronan sat down in the chair beside the bed. He did it with a heaviness that wasn't physical. The weight of someone who had been in enough rooms where terrible things were true and had never fully developed immunity to the moment before the response. Your husband, he said. I don't know, maybe. She was staring at the far wall. He threw me out last night because of forged evidence of financial fraud. He told me the child wasn't his. He's been building a case against me for I don't know how long enough to plant financial records, long enough to brief lawyers. She stopped. Long enough to start poisoning me. Or someone did it for him. Yes. Or that. She turned to look at him. Her eyes were dry. She'd used up whatever she had for crying somewhere around the 3rd hour on the road. He's been positioning himself to take control of Hale Biotech for 2 years. My father's company. My inheritance. If I die, if the baby dies, and then I die from whatever complications they were building toward, the estate falls to him. Our prenuptial specifies conditional inheritance. The child changes everything. How much is everything? She was quiet for a moment. The trust activates at birth. Nearly $300 million. Ronan was very still. He doesn't know I know about the trust's full terms, she continued. My father's lawyers structured it privately. Grant knows about the company holdings. He doesn't know about the secondary fund. She exhaled. Or he didn't. I don't know what he knows now. Ronan stood up, moved to the window. There were windows in this room, she realized, small and high, beginning to show the gray beginning of dawn at their edges. He stood with his back to her for a moment. I'm going to make some calls, he said. I didn't ask you to do anything. He turned. No, you didn't. I don't know what you want from this. I don't want anything from this. Men like you don't stop convoys in the rain for nothing. I stopped because you were in the road. He said it with the same flatness she'd heard in the car, but there was something under it now, something he wasn't offering her access to. That was the only calculation I made. She held his gaze. I'll need a phone, she said, and access to an attorney who isn't on my husband's payroll, and I need to know what Dr. Ewan found to be secure and not findable by anyone looking for me in the next 48 hours. All manageable. I also need to know who you're going to tell. He frowned slightly. About? About me. About the results. About where I am. She watched his face. Because the person who arranged the poisoning is going to notice I didn't die on that road last night. They're going to start looking, and if they find out whose house I'm in, they won't. You sound very sure. I am. Why? Because this is my house. He said it without particular emphasis, just as a fact. And nothing leaves it that I don't clear. She looked at him for a long moment. The room was getting lighter at the window edges. The monitor beeped its patient rhythm. Her daughter's heart working steadily away inside her, 4 chambers doing their ancient mechanical work. "All right," she said. Mont. His name was Cole Prater. He was 41 years old, had 2 kids in Wicker Park, had worked as a senior forensic accountant for Hale Biotech for 6 years, and had disappeared from his apartment 17 days ago. His supervisor had filed a missing persons report with the city. The city had flagged it non-priority. There was no evidence of foul play at the apartment and no criminal history on Prater's record, and the detective assigned to the case had 47 open files on his desk. Ronan's investigator, a compact, quiet man named Sergei, who communicated primarily through documents and a dry, minimal verbal shorthand, put this information in front of Ronan at 9 in the morning in the room they used as an office on the east wing of the estate. Violetta was sleeping again. The monitor was transmitting to Dr. Yuen's tablet. "He filed an internal complaint 6 weeks ago," Sergei said. He slid a printed page across the desk. "Flagged anomalies in 4 subsidiary accounts. The complaint went to the compliance officer." Ronan looked at the page. "Who's the compliance officer?" "Was. Martin Orell. He resigned 3 weeks ago, left the city." "Find him." "Working on it." Sergei slid another page across. "The accounts Prater flagged. They've been restructured since his disappearance, clean on the surface. But the transaction timing is off if you know what you're looking at, and Prater left a backup." He tapped the page. He emailed a compressed file to a personal account 3 days before he went missing. Small file, encrypted. "You have it?" "I have it. We're working the encryption." Sergei paused. "There's something else." Ronan waited. Prater wasn't the only one flagging anomalies. There was a second internal inquiry filed by someone in the Hale Biotech legal department, filed under a junior attorney's credentials. Sergei laid a 3rd page down. "But the language in the filing doesn't read like a junior attorney. Too specific, too structured." Ronan looked at the page. The filing was dated 14 months ago. It was about the board vote that had shifted operational control of Hale Biotech's executive committee. It named Grant Holloway specifically as having presented falsified revenue projections to secure proxy votes. And at the bottom of the document, in the metadata that Sergei's people had pulled from the original digital filing, was a user IDV-Hale-legal-access-7. Violetta. She'd known, or had suspected. 14 months ago, she'd filed an internal legal challenge using a junior attorney's credentials to keep her name off it. Careful enough to use someone else's login, not careful enough to scrub the user metadata. And somehow, the filing had been buried, routed into a subfolder of the compliance system that no one reviewed, or that had been made to stop being reviewed. Ronan sat back. The shape of it was assembling itself. Not completely. There were gaps. There were figures he couldn't yet place. There were transactions that went somewhere he couldn't follow yet. But the shape was there. The outline of something that had been built over time, with patience, with access, with the specific architecture of someone who understood exactly how institutions fail when the people inside them are incentivized to look away. Grant Holloway had not acted alone. This was not a man who'd gotten greedy and improvised. This was a campaign. This had departments. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. Sergei was already standing. He'd read the same information from Ronan's face that Ronan was reading from the screen. "That name," Ronan said. "Celeste Vey," Sergei said. "Executive VP at Holloway Capital Partners. She joined the firm 4 years ago." He paused. "Same month Holloway married Hale." The room was very quiet. Ronan set the phone face down on the desk. "I want everything on her. Everything. Who she talks to, where she banks, where she was the night Prater disappeared, who she hired and how she paid them." "Already started. Double it." Sergei gathered the papers. At the door, he stopped. Turned back. "The woman upstairs. What about her?" "She filed that complaint 14 months ago. She knew something was wrong and she tried to fix it from inside. Then she stopped." He said it without judgment, just the factual specificity he applied to everything. "Why'd she stop?" Ronan thought about it. "She got pregnant," he said. Sergei nodded once and left. Ronan sat alone in the office with the early morning light coming through the windows and the city somewhere in the distance behind its trees and its gates, and he thought about a woman who had tried to fight quietly from inside a system that was already working against her, who had decided, for whatever reason, probably the reason that was currently growing at a regular heartbeat upstairs, to pull back, to wait, to keep her head down and get through the pregnancy and figure out the rest later. He thought about what it cost a person to make that kind of calculation. His phone buzzed again. He turned it over. The text was from a number he didn't have saved, but he knew the area code. He knew what that exchange meant in terms of which district of the city it originated from. It read, "We know she's alive. Return her by midnight or we release everything we have on your operation to the federal task force. All of it. You have 12 hours. Ronan read it twice. Then he set the phone down and called Sergei back into the room and said, in a voice that had gone completely level, the voice he used when the situation had moved past the point where emotion was a useful tool, "We have a problem." Upstairs, Violetta's monitor beeped its patient rhythm. Her daughter's heart kept beating, steady and furious and unknowing, in the dark. The text had been sent from a burner. Ronan knew this before Sergei confirmed it. It was the kind of number that existed for exactly one message, the kind that burned itself the moment it was used, untraceable in any direction that mattered. What it told him wasn't location or identity. What it told him was capability. Whoever sent it had access to his operation's details. Not rumors, not street-level gossip, but specifics. The kind of specifics that came from inside. He sat with that for 30 seconds. Then he called Marcus Teal. Marcus was his logistics head, had been for 9 years, had been present for every significant decision Ronan had made in the past decade. He was also the only person outside of Sergei who knew the full routing structure of the operation's financial architecture. The part that, if handed to a federal task force with the right annotations, would take 4 to 6 years to untangle in court, but would take considerably less time to destroy in the press. Marcus answered on the second ring. "Yeah." "Where are you?" "Warehouse on Kedzie, inventory check." A pause. "What's wrong?" "Come to the house. Now. Don't call anyone between here and there." A longer pause. "Ronan?" "Now, Marcus." He hung up. Sergei was already at the whiteboard they kept in the East office. Not an actual whiteboard, a section of matte wall treated with erasable coating, because Ronan had learned a long time ago that paper left the room and walls didn't. He was writing names, Prater, Orel, Vey, Holloway, connecting them with lines that weren't conclusions yet, just possibilities. The geometry of a picture that was assembling itself whether they wanted it to or not. "The leak," Ronan said. "I know." "How specific is what they have?" Sergei turned. His face was the same as always, controlled, precise, offering nothing extra. "If they know she's alive, they had someone watching the road. That's surveillance on a route we use 3 times a week." He let that sit. "They weren't watching her, they were watching us." Ronan looked at the wall, at the names, at the lines between them. "How long has someone been watching us?" "That's the question." Marcus arrived 19 minutes later. He came through the side entrance the way he always did, shook rain off his coat in the mudroom, appeared in the office doorway with his jaw slightly forward and his eyes moving over the room in the rapid inventory-taking way of a man who understood that being summoned this way meant the information he was about to receive would require him to recalibrate something. He looked at the whiteboard. Something happened in his face. It was small, extremely small. The kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't specifically watching for it, and Ronan had been specifically watching for it from the moment Marcus walked through the door, a fractional tightening around the eyes. A beat of stillness before the normal response came. Marcus looked at the whiteboard and recognized something on it. "Sit down," Ronan said. "What is this?" "Sit down, Marcus." Marcus sat. He put his hands on the table in front of him, flat, deliberate, the gesture of a man making a visible effort to appear unconcerned. Ronan noted the effort. He pulled a chair out and sat across from him and said nothing for a moment, just looked at him, which was frequently more effective than speaking. "The woman we brought in last night," Ronan said. "I heard. Sergei briefed me this morning on. Someone sent me a text an hour ago telling me they know she's alive, telling me to return her." He watched Marcus's face. 12-hour window. Marcus met his eyes. You think it came from inside? The route we used last night isn't public. The facility address isn't public. The only people who knew we were bringing someone in were the convoy personnel and the house staff. Ronan kept his voice flat, almost administrative, the tone he'd developed for conversations that were about to become irreversible. So yes, could be one of the drivers. Could be. Or someone on Ewan's team. Could be that too. Ronan leaned back slightly. Where were you last night, Marcus, before the warehouse? The question landed in the room like a dropped key. Small sound. Large consequence. Marcus didn't look away. He was good at not looking away. 9 years had given him a lot of practice at standing in the middle of Ronan's attention and not flinching. But the hands on the table, so the flat, deliberate hands, pressed down a little harder. Meeting on the south side, finished around 10. With who? Supplier contact, Mendez. Mendez hasn't been a supplier contact for 3 months. He moved his operation to Indianapolis in August. Ronan watched him. You knew that. Silence. Marcus exhaled through his nose. A long, slow, controlled exhalation of a man deciding which version of the next few minutes to choose. It wasn't Mendez, it was, He stopped. Don't construct this, Ronan said quietly. I've known you 9 years. Don't construct something and hand it to me. A long pause. It was a meeting with a lawyer, Marcus said. Not my lawyer, someone else's. They reached out 6 weeks ago. Said they had information about an internal inquiry at a company called Hale Biotech that touched on some of our accounts. Some of the shell routing we used for the Decker acquisition 2 years ago. He looked at the table. They said if it went to the task force, our name came up. They offered a clean extraction. All our exposure removed from the filing in exchange for... He stopped again. In exchange for what? Ronan said. Information about our routes, the facility locations. He didn't look up. They didn't tell me what they needed it for. I didn't ask. The room was very quiet. Sergei had stopped writing on the wall. You gave them the route, Ronan said. His voice had not changed registers. This was the thing that people who'd never been in a room with him during a moment like this consistently misjudged. They expected the anger to arrive loud. It didn't. It arrived as a kind of absolute atmospheric pressure, as a reduction of all available air. I didn't know about the woman, Marcus said. He looked up now. His eyes were doing something complicated. Not quite remorse, not quite defense. Somewhere in the degraded territory between the two where people go when they've made a decision they can't unmake and are only now beginning to understand its full dimensions. I didn't know they were going to... I thought it was about the accounts, about legal exposure. I was protecting to... You were protecting yourself. I was protecting the operation. By feeding our roots to someone who was trying to murder a pregnant woman on one of them. Ronan stood. He did it slowly, with the deliberate, measured quality of someone who is choosing his movements very carefully. You gave them the route, Marcus. You gave them the location of this facility. And now they know she's here, and they have a 12-hour window they've set, and they have enough of our operational details to make a credible threat to a federal task force. He walked to the window, stood with his back to the room. How much did you give them? A very long pause. Everything they asked for, Marcus said. The flatness of it was almost worse than an excuse. Just the fact of it, stated plainly, the way a person confesses when they've run out of the energy for anything else. Ronan stood at the window for what felt like a long time. Then he turned and looked at Sergei. Sergei nodded once and left the room. Marcus understood what that meant. He sat very still. You're going to tell me everything, Ronan said. The lawyer's name, the contact chain, every meeting, every communication, every piece of information you gave them and when you gave it. All of it. He returned to the chair but didn't sit. He stood behind it, hands on the back of it, and looked at Marcus with the particular quality of attention that had made certain men in this city very afraid of him over a long period of time. And then you're going to stay in this building until I decide what to do with what you've told me. Marcus nodded. He started talking. Upstairs, Violetta was awake. She'd been awake since she'd heard the side door close, The specific acoustic quality of this house was becoming familiar to her with the speed that unfamiliar places become familiar when you're paying very close attention, which she was, because attention was the only resource she had in surplus. She heard footsteps, heard the office door, heard through the floor the muffled texture of a conversation that had the cadence of interrogation without the specific words. She pressed her hand to her stomach. The baby moved. A slow, deliberate movement, elbow or knee working its way across in the underwater slow way of a baby, with enough room and enough calm to stretch. She exhaled. Dr. Yuen had been in at 7. The chelation protocol was working. The toxin levels in her blood had dropped enough in the first cycle that Yuen had allowed herself a brief expression of something adjacent to relief before recomposing into her normal register of controlled information. The baby's vitals were good. Her own pressure was elevated but manageable. She was medically stabilizing. Everything else was the opposite of stable. She needed to think clearly, which meant she needed to stop letting herself feel the enormity of it and work the parts she could work. Someone had poisoned her. That was a fact, documented, evidenced. The poison had come through her prenatal care. That pointed to Dr. Marsh's practice, which pointed to the access Grant had to that practice. The financial fraud charge against her was fabricated. She'd known this was coming for 14 months, had tried to stop it from inside, had failed. Grant was moving on Hale Biotech. He had been moving on it since before they married, possibly, or had pivoted to it once he understood what she had inherited. And now someone knew she was here and was using that knowledge as leverage. She'd heard enough, through enough floors, to know that whatever conversation was happening downstairs had the shape of a betrayal being uncovered, which meant the facility wasn't as sealed as Ronan had believed, which meant she was not as safe as she'd briefly, foolishly allowed herself to feel. She got up. The IV was on a rolling stand. Yuen had switched her to a mobile unit this morning in anticipation of her needing to move around. She took the stand with her to the small closet where her suitcase had been placed. Her clothes were dry now. She dressed slowly, carefully, with the awkward, deliberate choreography of someone 8 months pregnant who has been lying down for several hours and is working with a body that has opinions about movement. She was lacing her second shoe when the door opened. Ronan looked at her, at the shoes, at the suitcase she hadn't opened but had positioned near the door. "You were listening," he said. "The floor carries sound." He came in and closed the door. He didn't tell her to sit down. He stood near the window. Same position as in the office below, she realized. Window as default. The posture of someone who thinks better with an exit in his peripheral vision. "We have a problem," he said. "More than one." "Which one specifically?" "Someone inside my organization gave your location to the people looking for you. I've contained it, but they had a 12-hour window, and it started—" He checked his watch. 90 minutes ago. She finished lacing her shoe and stood up. "They're going to come here." "Possibly. I have teams rotating on the perimeter, but the facility has vulnerabilities that I'm not comfortable with now that we know someone was mapping it from inside. So I need to move." "Yes." "Where?" "I have a secondary location, more secure, off any list Marcus had access to." She looked at him. "Marcus?" "My logistics director. He was compromised 6 weeks ago." He said it with the flat economy of someone who has finished feeling whatever he was going to feel about it and is now in the part that comes after. He gave them routes, facility information, access schedules. In exchange for what? Removal of his name from a federal exposure. She absorbed that. So whoever hired the lawyer who approached him, they were already building this. 6 weeks ago, they were already preparing for a scenario where I survived long enough to end up somewhere they needed to find me. Yes. But 6 weeks ago, I was still in that house. I wasn't anywhere they needed to find me yet. She looked at the window, at the light outside it. They were preparing for the possibility that the poison didn't work. They had a contingency. Ronan said nothing. "This is not Grant," she said. Not a question. "Grant is part of it. He's not the architect." She thought about the name she'd seen on Sergei's wall through the half-open office door when she'd passed it on the way to the bathroom an hour ago. One name she hadn't recognized, one name that sat above the others on the wall in a way that suggested hierarchy. "Celeste Vey," she said. Ronan looked at her sharply. "I saw your whiteboard." She kept her voice even. "I don't know that name, but I know the executive committee vote 14 months ago. I know who seconded Holloway's motion on the proxy restructure. It was a new board member, someone Grant had pushed through on a skills and diversity basis 2 years before." She stopped. I never looked into her properly. She was quiet, competent, kept her head down in meetings. "She's been with Holloway Capital for 4 years, Ronan said. "She's been his partner, in every sense, for at least 3. The room shifted slightly. The way rooms shift when you receive information that reorganizes the past into a different shape. "He told me it was a business relationship," she said. Her voice was very controlled. "He brought her on. He said she was a colleague." She stopped. Then, "He was with her the entire time." "Yes." She sat back down. Not from weakness, from the need to be still for a moment, to let the architecture of the betrayal assemble itself completely so she could see the full shape of it. 4 years. The marriage. The pregnancy. The poisoning. The financial fraud. All of it running parallel to a relationship she hadn't known existed, with a woman who had been sitting in board meetings and foundation dinners and company events. "She was there when I announced the pregnancy," Violetta said. Her voice had gone somewhere quiet and level that didn't sound like her normal voice. "The board dinner in February. She congratulated me. She touched my arm." She looked up at Ronan. "She already had the poison in place by then. The nausea started in January. We think the delivery vehicle was the prenatal vitamin protocol. Marsh's office would have had access. Marsh went to Grant's golf club. I remember thinking..." She stopped. She'd thought it was charming. Husband and wife doctor, the kind of wholesome family medicine that made wealthy people feel cared for. She'd thought she was lucky to have continuity of care. How many people were in this? At minimum, Holloway, Vey, Marsh, Orell, the compliance officer, and whoever Vey hired for the physical operations side. There's a 4th party we haven't identified yet, someone doing the actual financial architecture of the fraud. She stood again. She couldn't stay still. She moved to the window and stood where he'd been standing and looked at the property outside. Trees, a long drive, the gray November sky over everything, flat and close. "My father built Hale Biotech from a licensing operation in 1987, she said. "He spent 31 years on it. When he died, he left it to me because he said I was the only one in the family who understood what it was actually worth, not the stock price. What it was." She pressed her palm flat against the glass. Cold came through it. "Grant understood what it was worth. He just understood it differently." "Violetta." She turned. Ronan's phone was in his hand. He was reading something. His face had gone very still in the way she was beginning to learn meant something had just changed the shape of the situation. "What?" she said. "Cole Prater." He looked up. "The accountant who went missing. Sergey's team found him. He's alive." A pause. "He's been in a safe house in Gary for 17 days. He got out before they could close the loop on him. He has the encrypted files." Another pause, longer. "He wants to testify. He reached out through a back channel 2 hours ago. He says he has documentation of the full transaction structure, every fraudulent transfer, the original signatures, the bribed board proxies, the shell accounts." She felt something happen in her chest. The structural failure from the night before, but in reverse. Something settling back into place. Not hope exactly. Something with harder edges than hope. "Where is he?" she said. "Gary. He wants a meet. In person. Neutral location. He won't transmit the files electronically. He says the last time he tried to move evidence digitally, it was intercepted, and that's what tipped them off to him." Ronan lowered his phone. "If we move him to a secure location, get him in front of a federal attorney with the files intact, then Grant and Vey can't clean this up," she said. "They can restructure accounts and shred documents and silence every person inside the company, but they cannot untestify a forensic accountant with the original files. No, they can't." She looked at him. "You're going to help me do this. I'm going to help you move him safely. What happens after that is between Prater and the federal attorney. He held her gaze. I have my own interests in how this resolves, Violetta. I need you to understand that. I'm not operating purely on charity. I know that. My name stays out of the federal filing. Completely. Whatever Prater testifies to, it doesn't touch my organization. That's between you and your lawyer. I'm telling you because you're going to be in the room when it happens, and I need to know you understand the terms. She held his gaze for a long moment. My father used to say that the most dangerous business partner is the one who has too much to lose, because they'll do anything to avoid losing it. She paused. I'm not telling you that to threaten you. I'm telling you because I want you to know I understand who you are, and that I'm choosing to trust the version of you that stopped a convoy in the rain, not the other version. Something moved behind his eyes. Not sentimentality. Something more complicated and more durable than that. We move in 2 hours, he said. Dr. Yuen will prep you for travel. Pack only what you need. He turned to leave. Ronan. He stopped. Marcus, what are you going to do with him? A pause. He stays in the building, under supervision, until this is resolved. And then, he looked at her over his shoulder, and then I decide. He left. She turned back to the window. Outside, 2 of Ronan's people were doing a perimeter check. She could see them at the far edge of the property, moving in the unhurried way of professionals, checking the line of the fence. She watched them, and she thought about Celeste Vey at the board dinner in February, the hand on her arm, the warm congratulations, the careful smile of a woman who already knew what she'd set in motion. She thought about what it meant to be in a war you didn't know you were in. You lost all the early battles. You lost them by accident, by trust, by the ordinary human failure of believing the shape of your life matched what you were being shown. You lost them without knowing you were losing. And then you woke up on a wet road at midnight with nothing in your hands, and you had to decide, right there in the rain with the damage already done, who you were going to be when you got back up. Her phone, Ronan's staff had sourced her a clean phone that morning, buzzed on the bed. Unknown number. She stared at it. It buzzed again. She picked it up, answered without speaking. A voice she recognized said, "Don't get in that car." She stopped breathing. The voice was Dr. Yuen's. "Listen to me carefully," Yuen said. Her voice was stripped of its clinical quality. Raw underneath, tight. The voice of someone who has been carrying something too long and has reached the limit. The meet with Prater. It's not real. He didn't reach out. The message came from Vey's side. They built it to move you. A fractured pause. They know Ronan will take a convoy. They know the route options out of this property. They've been planning this since last night. Violetta stood very still. Her hand was on her stomach. The baby was moving. "How do you know this?" she said. Her voice came out almost steady. The pause on the other end of the line was 2 seconds long, 2 seconds that told her everything she didn't want to know about the answer. "Because they contacted me first," Dr. Yuen said. 3 weeks ago, before you arrived." Her voice fractured on the last word, caught itself, held. "Ronan doesn't know. I need you to understand, but I didn't give them anything. I refused. But they know I refused, and they've been watching this facility since then, and Marcus's information confirmed what they already—" "How did they contact you?" Violetta said. Another pause. "Through Dr. Marsh," Yuen said. The room went very quiet. Marsh, the careful hands, the too long look at the chart, the prenatal practice that had been administering a slow-burning toxin for 3 months. Not just a bribed physician, a connecting tissue. A person who moved between the world. Celeste Vey controlled, and the world. She had 40 seconds before Ronan came back through that door. She knew this because she'd heard his footsteps go down the corridor toward the east office, heard the door open, heard the brief exchange with Sergei, 2 voices, low and rapid. And she knew from 2 days of living inside the acoustic structure of this building that the east office was 60 feet away, and that Ronan moved with the unhurried deliberation of someone who didn't rush unless the situation demanded it. And right now, he didn't know the situation demanded it. 40 seconds. "Yuen?" she said into the phone. Her voice was very quiet. "Is Prater real?" Is there an actual accountant? Yes, Cole Prater is real. He did go into hiding, but the message Ronan received did not come from him. A pause, tight and thin. I don't know if Prater is still alive. Who else in this facility do they have contact with? I don't know. Marsh gave them my name. I don't know who else he gave them. Where are you right now? My office, ground floor, east wing. Same wing as Ronan. She did the math. Stay there. Don't move. Don't call anyone else. She hesitated. Did you tell Ronan any of this? Not yet. I called you first because... Ewan stopped. Because you weren't sure how he'd respond. Yes. Violetta understood that. She also understood that Ewan had made a choice by calling her first, and that choice meant something, and she didn't have time to figure out exactly what it meant, but she filed it. I'm going to tell him, Violetta said. Stay in your office. She ended the call. She stood in the center of the room for exactly 3 seconds. 3 seconds where she let herself feel the full weight of what she was holding. The compound tear of it, the baby moving slowly inside her, the facility potentially compromised at a level that went beyond Marcus, the fake convoy route waiting to be activated the moment Ronan gave the order to move. 3 seconds. Then she walked out of the room. She came through the east office door without knocking. Ronan and Sergei both turned. The room had the dense, focused atmosphere of two people who had been moving fast through information and were not accustomed to interruption. The Prater meet is a trap, she said. Neither of them spoke. Ewan just called me. She was contacted 3 weeks ago by Marsh, the same physician who administered the toxin. They asked her to cooperate. She refused, but they've been watching her since. She thinks the message about Prater came from Vay's side, designed to get us moving in a convoy on a known route. Ronan looked at her for one long, still moment. Then he looked at Sergei. Kill the convoy order. Sergei was already on the phone. Ewan is in her office, Violetta continued. She's not compromised. She refused them. But she's scared, and she's been holding this for 3 weeks, and she needs to be in this room. Get her, Ronan said to the man standing near the door. She didn't know his name, didn't know most of their names, but he moved immediately. Ronan walked to the desk. His jaw was set in a way she hadn't seen before. Not the controlled stillness she'd come to associate with him, but something tighter, the expression of a man recalibrating under pressure and doing it fast. If the Prater message is fabricated, he said, not to her specifically, to the room, they have someone with access to our communication channels, not just routes and facility locations, active comms. Marcus, Sergei said, lowering his phone. Marcus gave them channel access? He gave them the encryption keys for the secondary relay. He said it was just routing information. Sergei's voice was flat and specific and contained no editorial content. He didn't understand what the keys could do. Ronan put both hands on the desk, pressed down, said nothing for a moment. Violetta watched the muscles in his jaw work. They've been in our communications, he said, since at least 3 weeks ago, possibly longer. Which means every move we've discussed in this building since she arrived? He stopped. They know, Sergei said. The room was very quiet. Dr. Ewan appeared in the doorway. The man had brought her quickly, and she arrived looking like someone who had been carrying a specific weight for a very long time and had just set it down and wasn't sure what her posture was supposed to be without it. She looked at Ronan. She didn't apologize. She said, "What do you need to know?" "Everything Marsh told you," Ronan said. "Start from the beginning. Fast." She started. It took 11 minutes. By the end of it, Sergei had filled 2 more sections of the wall. The picture was complete now in a way it hadn't been at 6 in the morning. Celeste Vay had not merely orchestrated the financial fraud and the poisoning. She had built a parallel intelligence operation around Ronan's organization for the specific purpose of using it as leverage. The exposure she'd offered Marcus wasn't incidental. It was the product of months of deliberate infiltration, mapping the organization's vulnerabilities with the patience of someone who planned to use those vulnerabilities not immediately, but exactly when needed. When Violetta survived the road, that was the trigger. The contingency Violetta had identified. If the poison failed, if Violetta lived past delivery, and the trust activated and she had any ability to fight back, the exposure of Ronan's operation was the weapon designed to neutralize the one resource Violetta had accidentally acquired, his protection. "She's not trying to get me back," Violetta said. She was standing near the wall, looking at the names, the lines, the architecture of it. "The 12-hour ultimatum. Returning me isn't the point. The point is to get the convoy moving on a route they control. Eliminate the threat in transit," Ronan said. "And if federal agents find the wreckage of one of my convoys with a dead pregnant woman inside, it becomes your problem, not hers." Violetta looked at him. "She eliminates me, destroys your operation, and walks away with Hale Biotech and the trust fund because there's no one left to contest the estate." She paused. "She's not just cleaning up. She's burning everything down and watching from a safe distance." Ronan straightened. "Where's Vey right now?" Sergei checked his phone. Last confirmed location was the Hale Biotech Tower. Board meeting this morning. Emergency session about the CEO transition. "She called a board meeting." "She's moving on the company while she moves on you," Violetta said. "She's doing both simultaneously." She felt something cold and clarifying move through her. Not calm exactly. Something harder than calm. "She's very good." "She's about to have a bad afternoon," Ronan said. He turned to Sergei. "Real Praetor. Find him. Not the message, the actual man. Put everyone we have on it. Gary, the surrounding area, any safe house network he might have accessed." He moved to the desk and picked up his phone. "And get me Holloway's location. Personal phone, vehicle, building access logs, everything." "Grant is at the Holloway Capital offices," Ewan said quietly. Everyone turned. She hadn't spoken since finishing her account. "He called me this morning. He said he needed a medical update on Violetta. I told him I hadn't seen her." She looked at Violetta. "He didn't believe me. He was very controlled about it. The way he gets when he's already decided something and is just confirming." "He knows she's here," Ronan said. "He suspects. He's not certain." "He will be soon." Ronan looked at Violetta. "We need to move you, but not in a convoy and not on any route that went through our communication system in the past 3 weeks." "Where?" "There's a location that's never been in any digital record. No file, no briefing, no communication. I bought it in cash through 4 layers of shell 12 years ago, and I've used it twice. Sergei knows it. Nobody else in this organization does." He held her gaze. "You'd be secure there." "And then what?" "Then we find Prater for real, and we find a way to get him in front of a federal attorney without moving through any channel Vey can monitor." She looked at him. "You have a federal contact." A pause. "I have someone who owes me a significant debt and who has the authority to convene an emergency grand jury session with sufficient evidence." He said it with the careful specificity of a man disclosing something he doesn't disclose. "It's not a clean relationship, but it's real." "Use it," she said. "I intend to." He turned. "Sergei." The explosion was not large. It was precise. The east wing's external wall, the section facing the rear property, 15 feet from where they were standing, absorbed a shape-charged detonation that blew the window inward in a single violent exhalation of glass and frame and cold air. The sound was enormous and immediate and physical, the kind of concussive force you feel in your sternum before you hear it with your ears. Violetta was thrown sideways by the pressure. She hit the desk with her shoulder and went down, and her hands went to her stomach instinctively, and she was on the floor with glass in her hair before she fully understood what had happened. Ronan was on the floor too. Not thrown, dropped, the response of someone trained to get below the blast line. He was up in 3 seconds. She heard him say something fast and hard in the direction of the door, and then he was beside her with his hand on her arm. "Are you hit?" "No, the baby." "Are you hit?" "No, I'm okay. The baby's—" She pressed her hand to her side. Movement, rolling, slow, the baby registering the shock through amniotic distance. "She's okay. I'm okay." He pulled her up. The room was full of dust and the specific smell of a shape charge. Acrid, mineral, deeply wrong. Sergei was already at the door, weapon out, talking into his earpiece. Ewan was against the interior wall with her hands over her head, unhurt. "They're on the property," Sergei said. "How many?" "East fence, north fence, at least 8, maybe more." Ronan looked at Violetta. Something moved through his eyes, the rapid calculation of a man with too many variables and not enough time. He made a decision. She could see the moment he made it. "The basement passage," he said to Sergei. "Marcus is down there. Put him somewhere else." He took Violetta's arm. "Move." They moved. The house was not panicking. That was the thing she noticed as Ronan pulled her through the corridor at a pace that was just below a run, calibrated to what her body could manage. The house was operating. People were moving with the specific coordinated efficiency of a structure that had protocols for exactly this kind of event, and the protocols were running, and what looked from the outside like chaos was actually something more like a machine shifting into a different gear. She ran anyway. Or the closest thing to running that 8 months pregnant allowed, a fast, lurching momentum with one hand on the wall and one on her stomach and Ronan's hand on her arm, and the sound of gunfire starting somewhere outside, sharp and deliberate, the specific cadence of a firefight that had been planned rather than improvised. They came through a door in the kitchen wall, a door that looked like a cabinet that Violetta would not have identified as a door, and down a concrete staircase that was lit by strip lighting bolted to the ceiling. The basement was utilitarian and cold and large, a working space with no decorative pretension. Generator units, storage, a long corridor running toward the north. Sergei was ahead of them. 2 other men she'd seen on the perimeter detail were behind. From somewhere above, something else exploded. This one was further away but larger. She felt it in the floor, a deep structural shudder, and the strip lighting flickered and held. "What was that?" she said. "Vehicle," one of the men behind her said. Flat and informational. They hit the end of the corridor. A door. Steel reinforced, double bolted. Sergei had the key out before they arrived and had it open in 4 seconds. Beyond it, a tunnel. Low ceiling, poured concrete, the smell of earth and cold and drainage. The tunnel was old, older than the current structure above, running in a direction she triangulated as northeast based on the angle of their descent. Ronan turned to the 2 men. "Hold the stairwell. Do not follow." They understood. They turned back. She and Ronan and Sergei went into the tunnel. Ronan's phone flashlight lit the space, narrow, enough for one person, which meant single file. Sergei first, then Violetta, then Ronan behind her. The floor was dry but uneven, and she had to watch her feet, and the ceiling was close enough that Ronan had to duck his head slightly at intervals. "How long?" she said. "Quarter mile," Sergei said from ahead. "How old is this tunnel?" "Prohibition," Ronan said from behind her. Just the one word. She almost laughed. She didn't, but the impulse was there, the slightly hysterical recognition of absurdity that surfaces in moments of extreme pressure. She was walking through a Prohibition-era smuggling tunnel, 8 months pregnant, with a crime lord and his most trusted operative, while people with weapons took apart the house above them. She walked. Her back was not happy. The uneven floor transmitted directly to her lumbar spine, and the baby's weight was distributed exactly wrong for this kind of movement. She breathed through it, focused on the flashlight beam on the concrete ahead of her, focused on the baby's last movement, the slow, rolling acknowledgement of the blast shock that had told her the baby was still responding, still present, still doing the ancient, insistent work of existing. Halfway through the tunnel, her phone buzzed. She stopped. Ronan said, "Keep moving." "It's a text from an unknown number." She looked at the screen in the flashlight's bleed. It says, "Cole Prater is at 4417 Meridian Street in Gary. Back unit. He's been watching the news. He knows it's time." Silence in the tunnel. "That's not from Vay's side," she said. She didn't know how she knew this. She knew it the way you know certain things that don't come through logic. The phrasing. He's been watching the news. He knows it's time. The specificity of a real person communicating about a real situation, not the engineered precision of a fabricated message. Someone who actually knows him sent this. "Or they want you to think that," Ronan said. "Then we verify." She looked back at him in the dark. "We verify before we do anything. But if he's real and he's ready..." "One problem at a time," Ronan said. "Get out of the tunnel first." She kept moving. The tunnel ended in a root cellar beneath a structure that had once been a groundskeeper's cottage, now used for storage, The cottage itself long since converted to a utility shed with a padlocked exterior door. Sergei got the door open and they came out into cold November air and gray afternoon light on the far northeast edge of the property, screened from the house by a dense line of old-growth trees. In the distance, smoke, black and thick, rising from somewhere near the east wing. She stopped and looked at it. Ronan stood beside her. She felt him looking at it too, and she felt, without looking at him, without needing to see his face, the specific weight of what he was experiencing. His house, his people inside it. The calculation of what could be salvaged and what couldn't. Sergei, he said. Status. Sergei was on his earpiece. 3 confirmed down on our side. The attackers pulled back from the north fence when the response team pushed. East fence is still active. He paused, listening. They're not trying to hold ground. They came in, hit the east wing, and they're retreating. They weren't trying to take the house, Ronan said. No, they were trying to flush it. Sergei lowered his hand from his earpiece. Drive us out, into whatever they have waiting on the road. Into the convoy trap that didn't exist anymore, Violetta thought, which meant when the trap failed to fill, they would pivot. They would look for the alternative route. They would look for where the people who didn't take the convoy had gone instead. They had, she estimated, between 30 and 60 minutes before Vey's people recalibrated. The federal contact, she said to Ronan. Yes, call them now, not when we're somewhere safe. Now. Because we may not get to somewhere safe before Vey figures out we didn't take the bait. She looked at him. If your contact can get authorization to move on Hale Biotech's offices and Holloway Capital simultaneously, if they can secure Grant and the board and the financial records before Vey can trigger the contingency. She has one. She has a contingency for every scenario. She's been 3 steps ahead for 4 years. If she can't get to me, she burns the evidence. That's what she does next. She watched his face. She burns everything that connects her to this, and then she takes what she can take from Hale Biotech and she disappears. She's probably had an exit built for 18 months. Ronan looked at her for a moment. The smoke was still rising behind them. The cold was significant, and she could feel it working on her. Not dangerously, not the hypothermia of 2 nights ago, but insistently. He made the call. She listened to one side of it. Crisp, direct, no ornamentation. Names, locations, the shape of what was needed, the favor being called in with the blunt efficiency of a man who knew exactly what the debt was worth and wasn't willing to negotiate it down. 30 seconds. He hung up. 2 hours, he said. For what? For a federal team to be in position at Hale Biotech and Holloway Capital. He pocketed the phone. 2 hours is what he can do. Then we need to keep Vey from burning the evidence for 2 hours. How? Violetta had been thinking about this since the tunnel. The shape of it had been assembling itself with the specific clarity that extreme pressure sometimes produces. Not inspiration, just the mind working very fast through the available pieces and finding the configuration that fit. We give her something to chase, she said. Not the convoy, not a route. Me. Ronan went very still. She needs me gone before the trust activates at birth. The birth is, Ewan said, within 3 weeks, possibly less given the stress on my system. Vey knows that. She knows she's running out of time. Violetta kept her voice even. If she thinks she has a clean shot at me, a real one, no convoy, no armed escort, just me, she comes out of her position. She stops managing from a safe distance and she moves. And when she moves, she exposes herself. And your federal contact has 2 hours to get into position. She held his gaze. The moment she's visible, she's vulnerable. She's spent 4 years being invisible and she's very good at it. But she's not good at the part that comes after. You're talking about using yourself as bait. I'm talking about ending this before she can execute whatever her next contingency is. Her voice was steady. Her hands were not entirely. I'm not doing it alone and I'm not doing it without a plan. But yes. Ronan looked at her for a long moment. The smoke rose behind him. The cold pressed in from all directions. Somewhere inside the estate, his people were managing a firefight, and he was standing in a tree line with a pregnant woman who was, she understood from the look on his face, surprising him again. "The Prater text," he said finally. "Verify it. If it's real, if Prater is real and he has the files and we can get him in front of your contact before Vey burns the evidence, then we don't need to bait her out. The testimony does the work." She looked at him. "But if the files don't materialize in time, then we talk about bait," he said. He held her gaze. "Not before." She nodded. Sergei was already on his phone, working the Gary address, pushing whatever network he had in that direction. Ronan was looking at the smoke. He had the expression of a man who was done calculating the cost of things and had moved into the part where you just work the problem with whatever you have left. His phone rang. He answered, listened. She watched his face change. Not dramatically, just a tightening around the eyes. The specific compression of a man receiving information that makes the situation worse in a way he hadn't fully prepared for. He lowered the phone. "Prater's at the address," he said. "He's real. He has the files." A pause. "He also has a woman with him. He says she came to him 2 days ago. Said she had additional documentation." His eyes found Violetta's. She identified herself as an attorney, former Hale Biotech legal department. Violetta frowned. "Who?" "Her name is Dana Foss." He held her gaze. "She says she was the junior attorney whose credentials you used to file the internal complaint 14 months ago. She says she knew what you were doing when you filed it. She says she's been collecting documentation since." He paused one more time. "And she says Celeste Vey knows where they are. They have maybe 40 minutes before Vey's people reach that address." The cold pressed in. The smoke rose. 40 minutes to Gary. Ronan looked at her. She looked back at him. Neither of them said anything for a moment because there was nothing to say that the situation wasn't already saying with complete clarity. They had one shot, a closing window, 2 people in a safe house in Gary with the evidence that could end this, and Celeste Vey's operatives moving toward them right now through the flat industrial landscape south of the city, and every decision made in the next 30 seconds. Not a convoy. One black SUV, stripped of any identifying markings from Ronan's fleet, pulled from the utility garage on the northeast corner of the property where the groundskeeper had kept it for maintenance runs. Sergei drove. Ronan rode up front. Violetta sat in the back with Dr. Yuen beside her because Ronan had looked at Yuen in the tree line and said simply, "You're coming." And Yuen had not argued. The route to Gary went south and east through the industrial corridor, through the landscape where the city gradually stopped pretending to be a city and became something raw. Processing plants, rail yards, flat lots behind chain link, the particular exhausted geography of a place that makes things other places consume. The sky was low and colorless. The highway was sparse in the mid-afternoon lull between truck delivery windows. Violetta watched it pass and kept her hand on her stomach and did not speak. Her back had moved past the familiar grinding ache into something with sharper intervals. Not contractions, not yet, or not the real kind, but the body's preparation for them, the slow tightening of systems making ready. She knew what it was. She didn't say anything about it. 38 minutes. Ronan had people moving ahead of them. Not convoy, not a formation that would flag surveillance, just 2 separate vehicles already en route through different roads, converging on the Meridian Street address from the north and west. His federal contact had confirmed deployment. The teams at Hale Biotech and Holloway Capital were in position, but holding. They would not move until Ronan's signal, because the signal had to be simultaneous. If Holloway or Vey got any warning that one location was being hit, the other would burn the evidence before the second team arrived. Everything had to happen at once. "How far out are Vey's people?" Violetta said. Ronan checked his phone. "Sergei. 30 minutes? Maybe less. They hit a construction delay on the 90, but they're around it now." Sergei's eyes stayed on the road. "We have a window. It's not comfortable." "It doesn't need to be comfortable," Violetta said. "It needs to be enough." 4417 Meridian Street was a 2-story brick building in a block of 2-story brick buildings that had been built for industrial workers in the 1940s and had since passed through several generations of use without ever quite deciding what it was. The ground floor was a defunct tile distributor. The back unit on the second floor was accessed through a rusted exterior staircase that ran up the building's rear and terminated at a steel door with 2 deadbolts and a chain. Cole Prater opened it before they knocked. He was smaller than she'd expected from the name. 41, the file had said, but he looked older. The specific aging that happens to people who've been frightened for an extended period, the way fear deposits itself in the face around the eyes and at the corners of the mouth. He had 3 days of beard, clothes that had been worn too many days consecutively, and the posture of a man who had been listening to every sound in a building for 17 days and had not fully stopped listening even now. He looked at Violetta. She looked back at him. "You're her," he said. "Yes." He stepped back. They came in. Dana Foss was at the table. She was younger than Violetta had pictured. Early 30s, with the contained, precise energy of someone who had gone to law school young and had spent years learning to make herself smaller in rooms where she was the most qualified person present. She looked up when they entered, and she looked at Violetta with an expression that was complicated and specific, and that Violetta needed a moment to decode. Then she decoded it. Dana Foss had been carrying this for 14 months. She had watched the internal complaint disappear into the compliance system. She had watched Grant Holloway consolidate the board. She had watched Violetta's position at her own company become increasingly theoretical, and she had stayed, had collected documentation, had waited. The expression was, "I hoped you'd make it." "The files," Ronan said. He didn't have time for the emotional architecture of the reunion. Prater moved to the back of the room where a laptop sat on an overturned crate. "Everything is here. 347 transactions across 11 accounts. The original timestamps before they were altered. The authorization signatures, Holloway's actual signatures, not the substitutes they filed with the board." He opened the laptop. The screen showed columns of numbers organized with the density of a document prepared by someone who understood exactly how it would need to hold up in court. "I also have the wire transfers from a shell entity called Corvin Capital to Dr. Lawrence Marsh's private account. 6 payments over 4 months. Ewan exhaled. "And the Vey connection," Violetta said. "Celeste Vey is the registered beneficial owner of Corvin Capital," Dana said from the table. She said it with the flat precision of someone who had rehearsed the sentence. "Through 3 layers of Cayman Islands structuring that took me 4 months to trace, it's documented, traceable, court-ready." The room was very quiet. Prater looked at Violetta. "I tried to file internally. Then Aurel disappeared and I understood the internal route was closed." He closed the laptop. "I'm sorry I didn't find another way sooner." "You're here now," she said. It wasn't absolution. It was just a fact, offered plainly. Ronan's phone buzzed. He read it. "Vey's vehicles are 18 minutes out." He looked at Sergey. "Transfer the files. Encrypted, direct to the federal team." "Or I have a direct channel to the assigned AUSA, Prater said. He pulled a second device from under the crate. A secured tablet. "She gave me this. For exactly this situation." "Use it," Ronan said. Prater sat. His hands moved with the fast, certain economy of a man doing something he'd been mentally rehearsing for 17 days. The file transfer began. A progress bar, slow and precise. Violetta moved to the window. It faced the street. She could see the block in both directions, the flat gray light on the pavement, a truck parked 2 buildings south that hadn't been there when they'd arrived. "Ronan, Ronan," she said. He was beside her in 4 steps. The truck, the angle of it, the way it was positioned not for a delivery, but for a sightline. "They're already here," she said. Yeah, everything moved at once. Ronan had the door open and was talking into his earpiece before she finished the sentence. She heard the short clip directives, the vocabulary of a man coordinating a response with people who needed 10 words or less. Sergey took a position at the interior staircase. Donna gathered the hard copy documents from the table. "Physical backup," she said, 2 inches thick, everything printed and certified, and put them in a bag with the automatic focus of someone who had a protocol and was running it. Prater kept transferring the files. The progress bar hit 63%. "How long?" Ronan said. 4 minutes. Maybe 3. From the street, a sound. Not an explosion this time, not the catastrophic architecture of the estate attack. Something smaller. A vehicle door. Footsteps on the exterior staircase that were too deliberate to be anything but what they were. Sergei moved to the door. The chain held for 4 seconds. Then it didn't. 3 men came through in rapid sequence, and the room became very small very fast. Violetta moved backward, toward the wall, toward the corner where the table was, putting the table between herself and the door because it was the only geometry available. She heard Sergei and the first man collide. The meaty, graceless sound of 2 bodies making contact with genuine intent. And then she couldn't track it because the second man was around Sergei and in the room, and he was looking directly at her. He had a face she didn't know and a weapon she didn't want to think about, and he moved toward her with the professional indifference of someone executing a task. She picked up the laptop. She had approximately 2 seconds of decision available to her, and she used them. She picked up the laptop, open, the transfer at 71%, and she held it in front of her, and she said, with a voice that came from somewhere she hadn't known she had access to, "If this drops, the files don't transfer, and your employer doesn't get what she's paying you for." The man stopped, 1 step from her. His eyes went to the laptop screen, the progress bar. He understood what he was looking at. "You touch me," she said, "and I drop it." His jaw moved. He looked at the screen, at her, at the screen. "You don't actually want to kill me," she said. Lower now, closer to him, the way you talk to an animal when you need it to make a different choice. "You want to bring me in. That's the job. And you can't complete the job if the files transfer." She watched his face. "So stand there, or leave. Those are your options." He stood there. 84%. Ronan had the third man down. She registered this in her peripheral vision without looking away from the man in front of her. Ronan's movement efficient and final, the practitioner economy of someone who had been in rooms like this before and had made the same calculation that needed to be made. Sergei and the first man were still working it out against the far wall. Dana was in the corner with the bag against her chest and the specific expression of someone who is terrified and is choosing not to be paralyzed by it. Prater sat at the laptop with his hands on the table, not touching it, not breathing, watching the progress bar with the concentrated focus of a man who had reduced his entire existence to a single number climbing toward 100. 91%. The man in front of Violetta moved, not toward her. He made a decision she hadn't fully predicted, the lateral decision of someone who has done the math and found a different answer. He went for Prater. Violetta dropped the laptop, not from her hands. She set it on the table in one fast motion and put herself between the man and Prater with the specific, concrete, irrational courage of a body that has decided it's done calculating. She was 8 months pregnant, and she was in the way, and she looked at him, and she didn't move. He stopped. Not because of the weapon he was carrying, not because of her size or her strength or any physical calculus. He stopped because of the quality of her stillness, the absolute foundational quality of it. A woman who had been thrown out in a storm, poisoned, hunted through 2 states and a city, and was now standing between a forensic accountant and a gun with a hand pressed to her unborn daughter's back. The stillness of someone who has nothing left to lose except the one thing she will not lose. 98%. Ronan said, from behind the man, "Put it down." The man's jaw worked. 100%. "Files transmitted," Prater said. His voice broke on the second word. He cleared it. "They're in." The man lowered the weapon. The room exhaled. A moment. Outside on Meridian Street, 2 of Ronan's vehicles had boxed the truck. The remaining operatives, 3 of them, the drivers and 1 additional who'd been positioned as lookout, were on the ground with their hands visible before the federal vehicles arrived 4 minutes later. The federal vehicles arrived with the deliberate absence of drama that characterized operations that had been properly authorized and properly planned. No sirens. Dark sedans. People in vests with specific designations who move through the scene the way people move through scenes they've been briefed on, knowing where everything is. An assistant U.S. attorney named Renata Solis received the files directly from Prater on the secured tablet and stood on the sidewalk in front of 4417 Meridian in her coat and her reading glasses and went through the top-level directory with the specific attention of someone who understands immediately what she's looking at and is doing a rapid preliminary assessment of whether it will hold. She looked up, found Violetta. Holloway Capital and Hale Biotech are being secured right now, she said. Both locations simultaneously as of 4 minutes ago. She held Violetta's gaze. Grant Holloway was in his office. He's in custody. Violetta received this information. She felt something move through her. Not triumph, nothing with that particular flavor, which required a kind of lightness she didn't currently have access to. More like the feeling of a load-bearing wall being removed, the structure shifting, the need to find where the new weight would settle. Celeste Vey, she said. Solis looked at her tablet. A pause. We have a team at her registered address. She's not there. She looked up. She's in the wind. The words landed with a specific cold quality. In the wind. Ronan was beside her. She felt him process this the same way she was processing it. Not surprise, because people who plan as thoroughly as Celeste Vey plan for exactly this scenario, but the particular weight of an unfinished calculation. She'll surface, Solis said. She has the money, but she left the infrastructure. The Cayman accounts are being frozen as of this morning. She closed her tablet. She doesn't have the resources to stay hidden indefinitely. That's not the same as having her, Violetta said. No, Solis agreed. It's not. They stood on Meridian Street in the gray November light, and Violetta understood that the story she'd been living through did not have the architecture of total completion. Vey was gone. The evidence was secured. Grant was in custody. The company and the trust would be restored through a process that would take months of legal work and would be exhausting in specific bureaucratic ways that she could not yet fully anticipate. But the woman who had put poison in her prenatal vitamins and planned her death from inside a board meeting was somewhere in the world, beyond the current reach of anyone on this street. She could feel the incompleteness of it. She pressed her hand to her stomach. The baby moved. Vey was arrested 11 days later at a private airfield outside Guadalajara. Violetta was not present for this. She was in a hospital room on the 4th floor of a private medical center on the north side of Chicago, 3 hours into a labor that had started in the early morning with the patient, insistent quality of things that have been preparing for a long time and are finally ready. Dr. Ewan was there. This had been arranged through a conversation that had taken place in the days after Meridian Street, a conversation that acknowledged, without much ornamentation, what Ewan had done and what she had almost not done, and arrived at an understanding that was not absolution and was not condemnation, but was the practical working arrangement of two people who had been through something together and were choosing to continue beyond it. Ewan had contacted the state medical board regarding Dr. Marsh. She had given a complete account to Solis's team. She had done the things that needed to be done with the specific reluctance of someone who knows the cost and pays it anyway. She delivered Violetta's daughter at 6:41 in the morning. The baby was small, not dangerously, not requiring intervention, but small in the way of babies who have spent 3 months contending with a toxin that tried to prevent their existence and who have arrived anyway. She weighed 6 pounds and 2 ounces. She had dark hair and the particular startled expression of something encountering the world for the first time and finding it aggressively bright. Violetta held her. There is a specific quality to that first holding, the weight of it, the warmth of it, the way the baby's breathing is rapid and shallow and completely itself, indifferent to everything that preceded it, already only interested in what comes next. She'd known this was coming for 8 months. She hadn't known what it would feel like when the knowing became the actual thing. It felt like standing on the road again. Not the despair of it. The other part. The part just before the headlights appeared. The moment of absolute stripped-down existence. The moment when everything unnecessary had been removed and what remained was just the fact of being alive and what you intended to do with it. She pressed her face to the baby's head. The smell of it, the warmth. She stayed like that for a long time. Ronan came in the afternoon. He knocked. He waited. He came in and stood near the door with his hands in his coat pockets, and looked at the baby in the way people look at newborns when they are not quite sure what protocol applies, with a careful attention that doesn't want to intrude on something it doesn't fully understand its relationship to. "She's healthy," Violetta said. "I heard. UN called. Vey was arrested this morning." "I know." She looked at him across the room. The afternoon light was coming through the window at a low angle, the winter short daylight already beginning its early retreat. She had not slept. She would not sleep for a long time, and she knew it, and it didn't bother her in the way it would have bothered her a week ago, before the thing that had happened to her internal accounting of what mattered and what was manageable. "Your house," she said. "Repairable." A pause. "Most of it." "Your operation." "Adjusting." He said it with the flatness of someone who has decided not to perform the full scope of the damage. "Marcus's—" He stopped. "That's being handled." She didn't ask how. She had decided over the past several days where the edges of her understanding of Ronan Voss were, and what she was willing to know and what she was not. It was a deliberate decision. She made it with her eyes open. "The trust activates formally on Monday," she said. "My father's attorneys are filing the documentation today." She looked at the baby. "Hale Biotech will require a full board restructure. Solis's team is working through the co-conspirators. There were 4 board members who knew about the proxy manipulation. It's going to take time." "It will." "I have the legal team. I have the documentation. I have Prater and Dana Foss as witnesses." She looked up. "I have what I need." He nodded. A pause settled into the room. Not uncomfortable. The pause of 2 people who have been through something that doesn't have a clean category and are sitting beside the uncategorizable nature of it. "I don't know what I owe you," she said. "You don't owe me anything." "That's not true, and you know it." He looked at her. "It's true that I had interests in how this resolved. It's also true that those interests aligned with yours. I didn't stop for you because of a calculation." He paused. A rare pause from him. The kind that meant what came next was being chosen carefully. "I stopped because you were in the road." "You said that before." "It's still the same answer." She looked at him for a moment. "My father used to say the most important thing he ever learned was the difference between people who do things because they're useful and people who do things because they can't do otherwise." She shifted the baby slightly in her arms. "He said you could trust the second kind further." Ronan didn't respond to this, but something in his face acknowledged it. A small, specific acknowledgement, the kind that doesn't perform itself. "I need a name," she said. She looked at the baby. "I've been lying here for 6 hours, and I haven't settled on one. I'm not a useful person to ask. I'm not asking you to decide it. I'm just—" She stopped. The thought completed itself without words. She was just talking to another person in a room. The ordinary, necessary human thing of it. She'd been doing very little of that in the ordinary sense for longer than the past 3 days. She looked at the baby. "Her name is Mara," she said. It arrived as she said it, the way certain decisions arrive. Not made but recognized, already having been true and finally stated. Mara Hale. Not Holloway. Not her mother's name. Her father's name. The name of the company and the man and the 31 years that had made something that was worth fighting for. Ronan looked at the baby. "It suits her," he said, which was not the kind of thing she would have expected from him. She filed that. He moved toward the door, stopped. "Grant's preliminary hearing is Thursday," he said. "Solis says the financial fraud charges alone are enough for 20 years. The attempted murder charges pending the toxicology results." He stopped. "He's not walking out of this." "I know." "Vey will take longer. Her lawyers are already constructing the Cayman shell argument." He turned slightly, but the beneficial ownership documentation Dana found, it's direct. It's going to hold. "I know that too." He looked at her. She looked back at him. "Thank you," she said. Not for any specific thing. For all of it. For the stop in the rain and the medical wing and the tunnel and the vehicle on the way to Gary and the calculation about what to spend a federal debt on and the staying, for the staying. He nodded once. He left. She listened to his footsteps go down the corridor, listened to the elevator at the end of the hall, the sound of the building resuming around her. The ordinary sounds of a place where people were working and moving and doing the routine things that routine days contain. She looked at Mara. Mara was asleep. The rapid, shallow breathing of a newborn, the chest rising and falling with a frequency that still seemed improbable. The determination of a body to keep doing what bodies do. The absolute insistence of the living thing on living. She had been alive for 6 hours and 40 minutes, and she had already demonstrated considerable opinions about this arrangement. Violetta thought about the road. She thought about the 34-degree rain and the suitcase with the dragging wheel and the payphone that went unanswered and the moment of kneeling on the wet asphalt with her arm in the air, reduced to that single vertical fact. I am here. I exist. I am not yet done. She thought about everything that had to happen for her to be in this room. She did not think it was worth it, exactly. She did not have access to that kind of accounting, the kind that treats suffering as currency that purchases something. It had happened. She had survived it. The people who had arranged it would answer for it in the specific ways that institutions answer such things, imperfectly and slowly, and in the presence of lawyers, which was not the same as justice, but was the closest available approximation. And here was Mara, alive, warm, breathing with that furious, improbable frequency. Violetta pressed her lips to her daughter's forehead and held them there and breathed through her nose and let the room be still. Outside the window, Chicago moved through its afternoon. Trucks on the avenue below, a construction crane frozen against the gray sky. The lake somewhere to the east, behind the buildings doing what it had always done. Absorbing the weather, taking the cold, remaining massive and indifferent to the arrangements of the people who built their lives along its edge. The winter light failed slowly. The room went quiet. Mara slept, and Violetta Hale, who had been left on a road to die, who had been poisoned and lied to and erased from her own life by people who understood her father's work only as a number on a balance sheet, who had walked through a prohibition tunnel in the dark and stood in front of a weapon with a laptop in her hands, and a child she was not willing to lose. Violetta sat in the failing light with her daughter against her chest and breathed. Just that. Breathed. The war was over, not cleanly, not completely. There would be hearings and filings and the long, grinding administrative work of reclaiming what had been taken. There would be days when the cost of it surfaced in ways she wasn't prepared for. There would be a version of Celeste Vay's face she would carry for a long time. The hand on her arm at the February dinner, the warm smile, the already knowing eyes. There would be all of that. But right now, in this room, in this light, with this weight in her arms, there was only the fact of having made it, the raw, unglamorous, sufficient fact of it. She had made it. So had Mara. That was enough. For now, in the quiet of this room, at the end of this particular storm, it was entirely, completely enough.